Karen had always been the kind of person who faced life head-on. She wasn't someone who easily gave up no matter how tough things got. But nothing in her entire life could have prepared her for what happened one fateful evening, losing her only son, Ethan. He was just 24 years old when his life was tragically cut short in a car accident. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. He had left for work in the morning and was driving back home that night. But fate had other plans. The news hit Karen like a freight train. When the police arrived at her doorstep late that evening, she already knew something terrible had happened before they even spoke. Their solemn expressions said it all. They told her there had been an accident, a driver running a red light, and Ethan's car had been hit hard. Despite their best efforts, he didn't make it. Those words, "he didn't make it," reverberated in Karen's mind long after the officers left. She sat on the floor, clutching the edge of her couch, unable to cry or scream, just frozen in disbelief. Ethan had been the light of her life. After his father passed away when Ethan was only 10, she had raised him alone. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Every milestone, his first steps, his graduation, his first job, had been celebrated with joy and pride. Losing him felt like losing a piece of herself. Days turned into weeks, and Karen struggled to find meaning in anything anymore. Her house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. Even simple tasks like cooking dinner or watering the plants seemed insurmountable. But amidst the overwhelming grief, Karen found comfort in one place: the cemetery where Ethan was laid to rest. Visiting his grave became a ritual for her. First, it was unbearable. Standing in front of the polished granite headstone engraved with his name brought fresh waves of sorrow every time. But slowly those visits began to feel less like torture and more like therapy. She would bring flowers, sometimes his favorite snacks, and sit beside the grave, talking to him as if he were still there. "Remember that time we went hiking and got lost?" she'd say, smiling faintly through tears. "You were so mad at me for not bringing a map, but we ended up finding that little stream. You said it was the prettiest thing you'd ever seen." These conversations, though one-sided, helped keep Ethan alive in her heart. In some strange way, she felt closer to him there than anywhere else. One crisp autumn morning, Karen decided to visit the cemetery earlier than usual. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and the sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink. As she walked along the familiar path toward Ethan's grave, she noticed something odd. There near the base of his headstone was a small depression in the ground. It looked like a shallow hole about the size of a dinner plate. Karen frowned. She was certain it hadn't been there during her last visit. At first, she thought maybe it was caused by animals, perhaps a raccoon or squirrel digging around. Or maybe it was just natural erosion, though the soil in this part of the cemetery was usually well maintained. Still, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She knelt down and examined it closely. The edges of the hole were smooth, almost too perfect to be made by claws or rainwater. A chill ran down her spine, but she quickly dismissed it as paranoia. "It's probably nothing," she muttered to herself, placing a bouquet of daisies next to the headstone. Over the next few days, however, the hole kept nagging at the back of her mind. Something about its presence felt deliberate. So on her next visit, Karen paid extra attention to it. To her astonishment, the hole had grown larger since her last trip. What had once been a tiny indentation was now the size of a large bowl. The dirt around it looked freshly disturbed, as if someone or something had been digging overnight. Concerned, Karen approached the cemetery caretaker, an elderly man named Mr. Harper who had worked there for decades. "I noticed this hole forming near my son's grave," she explained, pointing it out. "Do you think it's animals? Or maybe vandalism?" Mr. Harper scratched his chin thoughtfully. That's peculiar," he said. "We haven't had any reports of animal activity lately, and I can't imagine why anyone would vandalize a grave. Let me take a look." Together they inspected the area. Mr. Harper poked at the soil with a stick, shaking his head. "This doesn't look like typical erosion either," he admitted. "I'll keep an eye on it, though. If it gets worse, we might need to call in a groundskeeper to investigate." Relieved that someone was taking it seriously, Karen thanked him and left. But deep down she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, images of the growing hole kept flashing in her mind. Why was it expanding? And why did it feel so unnatural? 2 days later, Karen returned to the cemetery, bracing herself for what she might find. As she approached Ethan's grave, her breath caught in her throat. The hole had grown exponentially. It was now wide enough to fit a basketball, and it seemed to plunge deep into the earth. Dirt clumps littered the surrounding grass, and the sight sent a jolt of fear through her body. This was no longer something that could be explained away as erosion or animal activity. Peering cautiously into the abyss, Karen expected to see loose soil and roots. Instead, she gasped. The walls of the hole were smooth, almost polished, and appeared to be made of solid rock. How could this be possible? The cemetery grounds were known for their soft, fertile soil, not stone formations. Her flashlight revealed faint markings etched into the sides, symbols and patterns that looked ancient and unfamiliar. They glimmered faintly under the light, as if alive. Her heart pounded in her chest. Should she report this to the authorities? Call a geologist? Or was this something beyond explanation? Something meant only for her to discover? Against her better judgment, curiosity overpowered fear. If this bizarre phenomenon was connected to Ethan in some way, she owed it to him and to herself to find out. Taking a deep breath, Karen resolved to explore further. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, she was determined to uncover them. Little did she know, this decision would set her on a journey unlike anything she could have imagined, one that would challenge everything she believed about life, death, and the mysteries of the universe. Karen couldn't stop thinking about the hole. It haunted her dreams and dominated her waking thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw its dark, gaping mouth swallowing up the sunlight, pulling her into an abyss of questions without answers. She tried to distract herself with daily routines, cleaning the house, cooking meals, even attempting to read a book, but nothing could fully erase the image from her mind. The hole was growing, changing, defying logic, and it felt personal, as if it had appeared specifically for her. The next morning, unable to resist the pull any longer, Karen returned to the cemetery. This time she came prepared. She brought a sturdy flashlight, gloves in case she needed to touch anything strange, and a notebook to jot down observations. As she approached Ethan's grave, her steps slowed. Her heart began to race when she saw that the hole had grown even larger since her last visit. Now it was big enough to fit a small child. The edges were jagged but oddly smooth at the same time, like they had been carved rather than dug. She knelt beside it, peering cautiously into the darkness. The air coming from within was cool and damp, carrying a faint metallic scent that made her nose wrinkle. Using her flashlight, she shone the beam down into the depths. What she saw took her breath away. The walls weren't just rock. They looked meticulously crafted, almost architectural. Strange symbols etched into the surface, glimmered faintly under the light, their intricate patterns shifting slightly as though alive. They reminded her of ancient hieroglyphs or runes she'd seen in history books, but these were unlike anything she recognized. Karen reached out instinctively, her gloved hand brushing against the edge of the hole. The moment her fingers touched the stone, a sharp tingle shot through her arm, making her gasp and pull back. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was unsettling, a buzzing sensation that lingered long after she withdrew her hand. "What is this?" she whispered aloud, half expecting someone or something to answer. Her rational mind screamed at her to leave, to call the authorities, to tell Mr. Harper or anyone else who might know what to do with such a bizarre discovery. But another part of her, the part that still talked to Ethan's grave, that clung to hope despite all reason, felt drawn deeper. There was something magnetic about the hole, something that whispered promises of answers, of closure, maybe even of miracles. She couldn't walk away, not yet. Summoning her courage, Karen grabbed hold of the edge and lowered herself carefully into the hole. Her feet found purchase on a narrow ledge just below the surface, and she steadied herself before continuing. Downward. Each step took her farther into the earth, the world above shrinking until it disappeared entirely. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the silence grew oppressive, broken only by the sound of her breathing and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. As she descended, the tunnel widened, revealing smooth stone walls adorned with more of those glowing symbols. They seemed to pulse faintly, their light casting eerie shadows that danced across the ceiling. Karen paused to examine them more closely, tracing their shapes with her flashlight. Some looked like stars and constellations, while others resembled animals or human figures. Others still were completely abstract, twisting and looping in ways that defied interpretation. Despite their alien appearance, they gave off an undeniable sense of purpose, as if they told a story she simply couldn't understand. The deeper she went, the stronger the tingling sensation became. It spread from her fingertips to her arms, then throughout her entire body, like static electricity building in the air before a storm. Karen hesitated, wondering if she should turn back, but every fiber of her being urged her forward, compelling her to keep going. Something important waited at the end of this tunnel. She could feel it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the passageway opened into a vast chamber. Karen froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand as she took in the sight before her. The room was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral, and illuminated by a soft, otherworldly glow emanating from crystals embedded in the ceiling. The light refracted through the crystals, casting prismatic rainbows across the walls and floor. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that looked like an altar, made of black marble polished to a mirror-like shine. On top of the altar lay an object wrapped in tattered cloth. It was small, no bigger than a shoebox, but it radiated an aura of significance so powerful that Karen's knees nearly buckled. She approached it slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. When she reached the altar, she hesitated, staring at the bundle as if it might come alive. Then with trembling hands, she unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a book. Its cover was bound in leather so old it crumbled at her touch, releasing a faint cloud of dust into the air. The pages inside were yellowed and brittle, filled with writing, in languages she didn't recognize. Some sections featured detailed sketches of celestial bodies, planets, stars, galaxies, and others depicted complex diagrams resembling maps or blueprints. One page, however, caught her eye immediately. It showed a drawing of a young man bearing an uncanny resemblance to Ethan. Beneath it were words scrawled in English. "He is not lost." Karen's breath hitched. She stared at the words, reading them over and over again until they blurred together. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of message? A clue? Or was she losing her grip on reality altogether? She flipped through the rest of the pages, trying to make sense of the cryptic text and images. Though most of it remained indecipherable, certain phrases repeated themselves in different languages, always translating roughly to the same idea. The bridge between worlds. A low hum began to fill the chamber, so subtle at first that Karen thought she imagined it. But as the sound grew louder, it became undeniable. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls around her. Startled, she glanced around, searching for its source. There was no one else in the room, no visible speakers or machines. Yet the hum continued, growing stronger until it vibrated through her chest, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. And then, suddenly, a voice spoke, not audibly but directly in her mind. It was calm and steady, neither male nor female, yet unmistakably sentient. "You have been chosen," it said. The words echoed in her consciousness, reverberating with an authority that left no room for doubt. Karen staggered backward, clutching the book tightly to her chest. "Chosen for what?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling. The voice explained that Ethan's soul had become trapped between worlds due to unfinished business. His sudden death had severed his connection to both the living and the dead, leaving him suspended in a liminal state. The book, it claimed, contained the knowledge necessary to guide him home, but using it would require courage, sacrifice, and faith. Failure would mean Ethan would remain lost forever. Karen's mind reeled. Could this be real? Was she truly standing in some kind of mystical chamber, holding a magical book capable of bringing her son back? Or was she hallucinating, driven mad by grief? She wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream all at once. But amidst the chaos of emotions, one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore this. Whether it was divine intervention, coincidence, or sheer madness, she owed it to Ethan to try, with newfound resolve. Karen tucked the book securely under her arm and turned toward the tunnel. The journey back to the surface felt shorter this time, though the weight of the book slowed her progress. By the time she emerged into the daylight, her legs ached, and her head spun with exhaustion. But she barely noticed. All she could think about was the promise of the book, the possibility of seeing Ethan again. As she stood there, blinking against the bright sunlight, Karen realized that her life had changed irrevocably. The hole that had started as a mystery had become a doorway, a threshold between the known and the unknown. And now, armed with the book and its secrets, she was ready to step through it, no matter where it led. Karen stood at the edge of the hole, staring into its depths once again. The sunlight behind her cast long shadows across the ground, but the darkness below seemed impenetrable, a void that promised both danger and discovery. She tightened her grip on the flashlight in one hand and the ancient book tucked securely under her other arm. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was purpose. For the first time since Ethan's death, she felt like she had something to fight for. Taking a deep breath, Karen lowered herself back into the tunnel. Each step downward brought her closer to the unknown, the air growing colder and heavier with every moment. The walls glistened faintly in the beam of her flashlight, their glowing symbols pulsing as if alive. They seemed to watch her, guiding her descent with an unspoken urgency. As she moved deeper, the tingling sensation returned. Stronger this time, coursing through her veins like an electric current. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like standing too close to a storm about to break. The journey down felt endless, though Karen knew logically it couldn't have taken more than a few minutes. Time seemed distorted here, stretched thin by the weight of the mysteries surrounding her. Every sound, the scrape of her boots against the stone, the echo of her breathing, felt amplified, as if the tunnel itself were listening. She tried not to think about what might be waiting for her at the bottom. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, letting the rhythm of her steps steady her nerves. When she finally reached the chamber, the sight took her breath away all over again. The crystal-lit ceiling shimmered above her, casting prismatic colors across the vast space. The altar in the center loomed like a silent sentinel, its black marble surface reflecting the kaleidoscope of light. But this time, Karen noticed details she hadn't seen before. Carvings covered the base of the altar, scenes depicting figures moving between worlds, crossing thresholds marked by archways of light. Some images showed people reuniting with loved ones, while others depicted solitary travelers stepping into shadowy realms. It was beautiful and haunting, a visual representation of hope and loss intertwined. Karen approached the altar cautiously, setting the book down gently. She ran her fingers over the carvings, marveling at their precision. They felt warm beneath her touch, almost comforting, as if they carried some residual energy from whoever or whatever had created them. She opened the book again, flipping through its fragile pages. Though much of the text remained indecipherable, certain phrases repeated themselves, written in different languages but always conveying the same message. The bridge must be built. She frowned, trying to make sense of it. What did it mean? Was she supposed to create some kind of connection between worlds? And how could she possibly do that? The voice from earlier hadn't offered clear instructions, only cryptic guidance. Frustrated, Karen leaned back, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. Maybe she needed to trust her instincts. After all, she'd come this far without knowing exactly what she was doing. Perhaps the answers would reveal themselves when the time was right. As if in response to her thoughts, The hum that had filled the chamber during her previous visit returned. This time it was louder, more insistent, vibrating through her entire body. The crystals overhead began to glow brighter, bathing the room in a radiant light that made Karen squint. She shielded her eyes with one hand, clutching the book tightly with the other. Then, the voice spoke again, not audibly, but directly. In her mind, calm and unwavering. "You must prepare," it said. "The path will test you. Only those who are pure of heart may cross." Karen swallowed hard. "Test me?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling. "What kind of tests?" "The trials will challenge your courage, your faith, and your love," the voice replied. "You must prove yourself worthy of bridging the divide. Failure will leave him lost forever." Her stomach churned at the thought of failing Ethan. But she nodded resolutely, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. "Tell me what I need to do," she said firmly. The voice explained that the book contained instructions for a series of tasks designed to guide her through the process. Each task corresponded to a specific aspect of her relationship with Ethan, his life, his dreams, the moments they had shared together. Completing these tasks would strengthen the bond between them, creating a pathway for his soul to return. But it wouldn't be easy. The trials would force her to confront painful memories, unresolved conflicts, and even her own guilt. She would need to face everything she had been running from since his death. Karen hesitated. The idea of reliving those moments terrified her, but she also knew she couldn't turn back now. If there was even the slightest chance of bringing Ethan home, she had to try. With trembling hands, she opened the book to the first page marked, with a ribbon. The instructions were simple yet daunting. Return to the beginning. Seek the truth. Confused, Karen stared at the words. What did they mean? Where was the beginning? Then it hit her. The accident. The place where everything had changed. The intersection where Ethan's life had ended so abruptly. That was where she needed to go. Climbing out of the hole proved harder than descending. Her legs ached and her muscles burned from the exertion, but adrenaline kept her moving. When she emerged into the daylight, she blinked against the brightness, feeling disoriented. The cemetery grounds looked eerily normal, untouched by the surreal events unfolding beneath her feet. No one else seemed to notice the strange occurrences or the massive hole that had appeared near Ethan's grave. It was as if the world above existed in a completely separate reality. Shoving aside her exhaustion, Karen drove straight to the intersection where the accident had occurred. Traffic flowed smoothly now, the chaos of that night long gone. She parked her car on the side of the road and stepped out, her heart pounding as she approached the spot where Ethan's car had been struck. A memorial had been erected there, a small wooden cross adorned with flowers and notes from friends and family. Karen knelt beside it, tears streaming down her face as memories flooded back. She remembered the phone call from the police, the frantic drive to the hospital, the unbearable silence when they told her he hadn't survived. She remembered sitting in the waiting room, clutching his jacket, praying for a miracle that never came. Most of all, she remembered the guilt, the crushing weight of knowing she hadn't been able to protect him. She replayed the argument they'd had the morning of the accident over and over in her mind, wishing she could take back every harsh word. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool metal of the cross. "I should have told you I loved you before you left. I should have held on tighter." As she sat there, crying and apologizing to the empty air, something shifted. The world around her seemed to blur, the sounds of traffic fading into a distant hum. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, a young man with familiar features. It was Ethan. He looked exactly as he had the last time she saw him, wearing the same jacket and jeans, smiling softly. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "It's okay. You're doing everything you can." Karen gasped, reaching out toward him, but her hand passed through empty air. He wasn't really there, at least not physically. Yet his presence was undeniable. "Ethan," she choked out, tears streaming faster. Is that really you? He nodded, his expression serene. I've been watching over you. You're stronger than you think, Mom. Don't give up. Before she could respond, he vanished, leaving her alone once again. But the encounter left her with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it. For him. Over the next several days, Karen followed the instructions in the book. Traveling to places tied to Ethan's life, she visited his childhood home, where she recalled the laughter and mischief of his early years. She went to his favorite park, where they used to play catch until sunset. She even stopped by the diner where he worked, speaking with his former co-workers who shared stories of his kindness and humor. Each location brought back vivid memories, some joyful, others bittersweet, but all essential pieces of the puzzle she was piecing together. Through it all, the book guided her, offering insights and reflections that helped her process her emotions. It reminded her that grief wasn't something to be overcome, it was something to be embraced, understood, and eventually transformed into love. Slowly but surely, Karen began to feel lighter, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had started to lift. By the time she completed the first trial, she knew she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had stumbled upon the mysterious hole in the cemetery. She was braver, more open, and more willing to confront the pain she had buried for so long, and though she still had many challenges ahead, she faced them with a quiet confidence driven by the hope of seeing Ethan again, even if only for a moment. Little did Karen know, the hardest parts of her journey were yet to come. But for now, she allowed herself a small measure of peace, knowing she was one step closer to bridging the divide between worlds. Karen's journey had taken her to places she hadn't visited in years, stirring up memories both cherished and painful. Each location tied to Ethan's life felt like a chapter in a story she thought she'd closed forever. But the book, and the voice guiding her, kept pushing her forward, urging her to delve deeper into her past and confront truths she had long avoided. It wasn't easy. Every step demanded more of her than she thought she could give. Yet with each trial completed, Karen felt a shift within herself, a growing sense of clarity and purpose. The second task outlined in the book was perhaps the most daunting yet. Forgive those who wronged you. At first glance, the instruction seemed straightforward enough. Forgiveness, after all, was something people talked about often. It sounded simple when framed as an abstract idea. But for Karen, it was anything but simple. Her mind immediately went to the driver who had caused Ethan's accident, the person whose reckless actions had shattered her world. How could she possibly forgive someone like that? She spent days wrestling with the concept, her emotions swinging between anger and despair. The thought of forgiving the other driver felt like betraying Ethan's memory. Wasn't holding on to her pain a way of honoring him? Didn't she owe it to him to never forget what had been taken away? These questions haunted her, making sleep elusive and leaving her drained. One evening, while sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Karen opened the book again. She flipped through its fragile pages until she found a section that caught her eye. It described forgiveness not as forgetting or excusing wrongdoing, but as releasing the burden of resentment. The text explained that carrying hatred and blame only weighed down the soul, preventing healing and growth. To forgive is to free yourself, it read. Below the passage was a sketch of two hands reaching toward each other across a chasm, symbolizing reconciliation, not just with others but with oneself. Though the words resonated with her, Karen still struggled to apply them. Forgiving the driver felt impossible, so instead she decided to start smaller. She thought about the people in her life who had hurt her over the years, friends who had drifted away, family members who had let her down, even acquaintances who had said unkind things during moments of weakness. Could she begin by forgiving them? The next day, Karen reached out to her older sister, Lisa. They hadn't spoken in months, their relationship strained by years of misunderstandings and unresolved arguments. Picking up the phone felt like stepping off a cliff, but Karen dialed the number anyway. When Lisa answered, her voice was guarded at first, wary of Karen's unexpected call. But as they began to talk, Walls slowly crumbled. Karen apologized for harsh words said in anger, and Lisa admitted regret for pulling away when Karen needed support most. By the end of the conversation, tears streamed down both their faces, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in years, they felt connected again. Encouraged by this small victory, Karen continued working through her list of grievances. She wrote letters to old friends, expressing gratitude for shared memories and apologizing for any harm she might have caused. Some responded warmly, others didn't reply at all. But each act of reaching out lightened her heart, giving her the courage to tackle bigger challenges. Eventually, Karen knew she couldn't avoid the hardest part any longer. She had to confront the driver who had changed everything. After some research, she discovered his name, Daniel, and learned that he had been sentenced to community service following the accident. He hadn't intended to run the red light. Fatigue and poor judgment had led to the tragedy. Still, knowing these details didn't make forgiveness easier. It took her several attempts before she finally worked up the nerve to visit him. Daniel lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. When Karen knocked on his door, her hands trembled so badly she almost turned back. But then the door opened, revealing a man who looked far older than his years. His face was lined with worry, his eyes shadowed with guilt. He recognized her instantly and paled, stammering an apology before she could say a word. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life. There's no excuse." Karen nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I know," she replied softly. "And I've carried it too, for a long time. But I can't keep doing that. I need to let go." They sat together in awkward silence for a while, neither sure what to say next. Then Daniel told her about the nightmares he still had, reliving the moment of impact over and over. He confessed how much he wished he could turn back time, how deeply he regretted his carelessness. Hearing his remorse softened something inside Karen. She realized that while Daniel had made a terrible mistake, he was also human, flawed, broken, and burdened by his own guilt. "I forgive you," she said finally, the words tasting foreign on her tongue but feeling strangely liberating. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to this pain isn't helping me, or Ethan. Daniel broke down crying, thanking her repeatedly. As Karen left his apartment, she felt lighter than she had in years. It wasn't that the pain disappeared entirely. She doubted it ever would. But letting go of the bitterness freed her to focus on healing rather than hatred. With this trial complete, Karen returned to the cemetery, drawn inexorably back to the hole near Ethan's grave. Night had fallen, and the moon cast silvery light across the grounds, lending an ethereal quality to the scene. She descended once more into the tunnel, her steps steady despite the weight of what she had accomplished. The chamber awaited her, glowing faintly as always, its crystals shimmering like stars in a midnight sky. When she entered, the hum returned, louder and more resonant than before. The altar stood unchanged, but the book now lay open to a new page. Symbols etched into the parchment glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the vibrations filling the room. Karen approached cautiously, reading the text aloud. "The bridge begins to form." Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The carvings on the altar shifted, rearranging themselves into a new pattern, a spiral leading upward, surrounded by images of figures walking hand in hand. The voice spoke again, calm and reassuring. "You are ready for the final step. Bring him home." Karen's heart raced. She had come so far, faced so many fears, and now the culmination of her efforts was within reach. But the instructions were vague, offering little guidance beyond a single phrase. "Speak his name." Closing her eyes, Karen took a deep breath. She focused on the sound of her own heartbeat, steadying herself. Then, with every ounce of love and hope she possessed, she whispered Ethan's name into the silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around her shimmered, distorting, like heat waves rising from asphalt. A figure began to materialize before her, a young man with familiar features and a gentle smile. It was Ethan, clearer and more vivid than he had appeared before. Tears streamed down Karen's face as she reached out to him, half expecting her hand to pass through empty air again. But this time she felt warmth. She felt him. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for never giving up on me." They embraced, and though Karen couldn't fully explain how, she knew this moment was real. It wasn't just a vision or a dream. It was a reunion forged through love, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. Ethan held her tightly, whispering words of gratitude and reassurance. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said finally, pulling back to look at her. "You've changed everything." Before Karen could respond, the chamber began to shake violently. Light poured in from above, blinding and radiant. Ethan stepped back, his form flickering like a mirage. "It's time for me to go," he said gently. "But I'll always be with you, in your heart, in your memories." "No," Karen cried, reaching for him. But he faded away, leaving her standing alone in the chamber. The trembling subsided, and the glow dimmed, returning the room to its previous state. Exhausted but elated, Karen climbed back to the surface, emerging into the cool night air. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Karen realized she had been transformed. The grief that had once consumed her was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She had found a way to honor Ethan's memory without letting it define her. And though she knew she would miss him every day, she also knew she had given him the peace he deserved. The hole near his grave had vanished, leaving behind only undisturbed grass. To anyone else, it might have seemed like it had never existed. But Karen knew better. It had been the beginning of a journey, a bridge between worlds that had changed her life forever. Karen stood motionless outside the cemetery gates, watching the first rays of sunlight spill over the horizon. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion, but her heart was light in a way it hadn't been in years. The encounter with Ethan, so vivid, so real, had left an indelible mark on her soul. For the first time since his death, she felt a sense of peace that wasn't just fleeting or superficial. It ran deeper, like a quiet river flowing beneath the surface of her grief. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, questions swirled in her mind. What had truly happened down there in the chamber? Was it all some elaborate hallucination brought on by her overwhelming grief and desperation? Or had she genuinely connected with Ethan's spirit, bridging the gap between life and whatever lay beyond? She replayed every detail in her head, the glowing symbols, the voice in her mind, the warmth of Ethan's embrace, and couldn't dismiss it as mere imagination. Something extraordinary had occurred, something that defied explanation. The book remained tucked under her arm, its weight both literal and metaphorical. Karen glanced at it, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation. It had guided her through trials that tested not only her courage but also her ability to forgive and heal. Yet now, standing in the crisp morning air, she wondered what role the book still played in her life. Had its purpose been fulfilled? Or was there more it expected of her? She decided to return home before making any decisions. The walk back to her car felt surreal, as if she were moving through two worlds simultaneously, the ordinary one of paved streets and chirping birds, and the mysterious realm hidden beneath the earth. When she finally reached her house, she placed the book carefully on the dining table, unsure whether to open it again or leave it untouched. For hours, Karen sat staring at the ancient tome, her thoughts racing. Part of her wanted to dive back into its pages, searching for answers about what she had experienced and why. Another part feared what else it might demand of her. The trials had pushed her to her limits, forcing her to confront painful truths and make difficult choices. Could she endure another test if the book required it? Finally, curiosity won out. She opened the cover gingerly, half expecting the pages to crumble into dust. Instead, they glowed faintly, the same shimmering light she had seen in the underground chamber. Symbols danced across the parchment, shifting and rearranging themselves as though alive. At the center of the page was a single phrase written in bold, unmistakable letters. "Listen." Karen frowned. Listen to what? She murmured aloud. Then without warning, the hum returned, the deep, resonant vibration that had filled the chamber. It started softly, almost imperceptible, then grew louder, vibrating through the walls of her house and echoing in her chest. Startled, she clutched the edge of the table, waiting for the voice to speak again, and it did. You have done well, the voice said, calm and steady as always. But your journey is not yet complete. Her stomach tightened. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I thought I brought Ethan back. Isn't that what this was all about? You have given him peace, the voice replied. But there is more you must understand. The connection you forged does not end here. You are now a guardian, a bridge between worlds. A guardian? Karen repeated, incredulous. What does that even mean? I'm just me. I'm nobody special. You underestimate yourself, the voice countered gently. Your love, your sacrifice, your willingness to face the unknown. All these qualities make you uniquely suited for this role. There are others like Ethan, souls caught between realms, unable to move forward. They need guidance, just as he did. And you can help them. Karen shook her head, overwhelmed by the enormity of what the voice was suggesting. Help them how? I barely understood what happened with Ethan. How am I supposed to do this for anyone else? The book will guide you, the voice assured her. It contains knowledge passed down through countless generations. Open your heart, and it will reveal what you need to know when the time comes. Trust in yourself and trust in the process. Before Karen could respond, the hum faded, leaving her alone in the silence of her kitchen. She stared at the book, her mind reeling. A guardian? Helping lost souls? It sounded impossible, like something out of a fantasy novel. But after everything she had been through, she couldn't deny the truth of the voice's words. If she had managed to reconnect with Ethan, maybe she could help others too. Over the next few days, Karen wrestled with the idea of becoming a guardian. On one hand, it gave meaning to the pain she had endured and the sacrifices she had made. It offered a chance to turn her loss into something greater, something that could benefit others. On the other hand, it terrified her. What if she failed? What if she misinterpreted the book's instructions or made a mistake that trapped someone? Forever? The responsibility felt immense, far beyond anything she had ever imagined. To ease her fears, she spent hours studying the book, poring over its cryptic passages and intricate diagrams. Some sections described rituals similar to the ones she had performed for Ethan, while others outlined methods for identifying individuals who needed assistance. One particularly striking illustration showed a network of threads connecting people across vast distances, symbolizing the invisible bonds that tied souls together. The accompanying text explained that certain people emitted a kind of energy, a beacon, that signaled their readiness to cross over. Guardians were tasked with finding those beacons and guiding the lost toward the light. As Karen absorbed this information, she began noticing subtle changes in her surroundings. Lights flickered unpredictably, even when no appliances were running. Shadows seemed to shift in strange ways, forming shapes that vanished as soon as she looked directly at them. Most startling of all, she occasionally heard whispers, soft, indistinct voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first she dismissed them as products of her imagination, but over time she realized they were trying to communicate. One evening, while sitting in her living room, Karen heard a voice clearer than the rest. Please, it begged, weak and trembling. Help me. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, scanning the room, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the plea lingered in the air, tugging at her heart. Summoning her courage, she grabbed the book and flipped to a section labeled, Finding the Beacon. According to the text, the first step was to focus on the source of the voice, allowing her intuition to lead her. Closing her eyes, Karen concentrated, letting the sound guide her thoughts. A sudden flash of insight struck her, a street name, a house number, a face hovering hazily in her mind's eye. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and keys and rushed out the door. The address led her to a modest home several blocks away, its windows dark except for a faint glow emanating from the upstairs bedroom. Hesitating only briefly, Karen knocked on the front door. A middle-aged woman answered, her expression wary. "Can I help you?" she asked, clutching the edge of the doorframe. I think so," Karen stammered, unsure how to explain herself. "Is there someone here who needs help? Someone who's lost?" The woman's eyes widened, and she stepped aside to let Karen in. Upstairs, in the dimly lit bedroom, lay an elderly man hooked up to machines, his breathing shallow and labored. His family gathered around him, holding vigil as his life slipped away. Karen approached cautiously, opening the book to a marked page. Following the instructions, she placed her hands lightly on the man's chest and closed her eyes, focusing on the energy surrounding him. Images flooded her mind, a lifetime of memories, joys, regrets, and unfinished business. She saw glimpses of his childhood, his wedding day, the birth of his children. She also saw moments of sorrow, an argument with a sibling that had never been resolved, a promise broken to a dear friend. These fragments formed a tapestry of his existence, each thread vital to understanding who he was and what he needed to let go of. Guided by the book, Karen spoke softly, addressing the man's spirit rather than his frail body. "You don't have to hold on anymore," she said. "It's okay to let go. Your loved ones will carry you in their hearts, and your journey isn't ending. It's transforming." At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint smile crossed the man's lips and his breathing slowed further until it stopped altogether. In that moment, Karen felt a surge of warmth, a release of energy that filled the room with light. The family wept, but their tears were mixed with relief and gratitude. They didn't understand what Karen had done, but they sensed that something profound had occurred. When she returned home later that night, Karen collapsed onto her couch, emotionally drained, but exhilarated. She had helped someone cross over. She had acted as a bridge just as the voice had promised. Though the experience was exhausting, it was also deeply fulfilling. For the first time, she understood the true scope of her new role, not just as Ethan's mother, but as a guide for others navigating the liminal space between worlds. The book remained open on the coffee table, its pages glowing faintly in the darkness. As Karen drifted off to sleep, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more calls, more journeys, more challenges ahead. But she was ready, or at least she was willing to try, because somewhere deep inside she believed that love and connection transcended death itself. And if she could help even one soul find peace,